And as we all found out, that piece was Herschel Walker, and we have a chapter on the missing piece of the puzzle. But Florida went through '79 with no wins. It was a 0-11 season. It was nobody was expecting them to be ranked at all. Well, Shanahan comes in, changes the offense, this, that, and the other, and they're ranked number 20 coming into Jacksonville with a shot at their first ever SEC title, or a share of it. And as all Georgia fans remember, in the 60s and 70s, we had a knack for breaking Florida's heart when they had a shot at winning the SEC title. I wish we would get back to that, but that's a whole nother program, I guess. So I wanted to find out, a few things. Why did Georgia run the play that they ran? Okay, there's a reason for running certain plays. They need to get a first down, but why did they run that play? Secondly, as you saw in the video, Nat Hudson makes the biggest block in the history of Georgia football. I mean, I don't think without question. Why did he make that block? Was it just a great physical play on his part, or was there some strategy behind that? And Jeff Harper gives a great reason as to why, and I'm going to let you buy the book to find out. And the real story behind the broken chair. There is a story behind Larry's broken chair. I don't think anybody knows where Larry's broken chair is now, but there's a real story behind Larry's broken chair. So I really kind of want to delve a little bit deeper and find out those little questions. We go through each quarter of the game, kind of building up until the play. And the play was called Left 76. And in that chapter, we break down Munson's call. And when he's yelling, Lindsey Scott, Lindsey Scott, Lindsey Scott, I'm going to read you an excerpt of what Barbara Dooley was doing at that moment. So then we go into the legacy aspect of the play and of the game and how important it still is to people to this day. And let me read you some excerpts from it, kind of give you a feel of the book, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, this is from the rivalry aspect of it. Mike Shanahan, give you a Florida perspective. I think everybody just knew growing up what a big rivalry it was, but you don't really know it until you get there and you're a part of it. How important it is to the alumni, to your players, to the university itself. People talk about different types of rivalries. You talk about Michigan, you talk about Ohio State. You've got Texas and Oklahoma. At least from my perspective, that Florida-Georgia, and he calls it Florida-Georgia, of course, because he went to Florida, or he worked there, said Florida-Georgia was as good as it was. And this comes from a guy who came from the Big Ten the previous year. At Minnesota, they had set all kinds of offensive records at Minnesota, so he really knows what he's talking about. This is from just a friend of mine, Joe Jackson, who grew up down in South Georgia, and this is what he has to say about the Georgia-Florida rivalry. A lot of Florida fans seem to think Florida football started in 1990. They failed to forget the other years when they were basically a dumb Vanderbilt. That always gets interesting reactions. Since I'm on a time schedule, I'm going to bypass the Freddie Jones article, but there's a great excerpt in here about Freddie Jones and the recruiting of Herschel Walker. Basically him having to go to Wrightsville the Easter morning 1980, because Herschel had decided that he was going to sign that day. And actually, Freddie was the only reporter allowed in the house. Just so happened that Coach Dooley had used up all of his visits. So Freddie's in the house while he signs. Coach Dooley's outside waiting for the signature on the national letter of intent. So I know we have some, do we have any Tech fans in here? Yeah. Okay. All right, I wouldn't whistle, but that's okay. My dad brought me up right. He went to Georgia. So, but I will tell you this. To tell the whole story, we have to give a lot of credit to the Yellow Jackets, because on that day, meanwhile back in Atlanta, the one-win Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, who had lost to Duke and Durham the previous week, were playing #1 Notre Dame. And without Tech tying #1 Notre Dame, Georgia may never make it to #1. And it's the irony of ironies that a lot of Georgia fans forget, that you got to give some credit where credit is due. So what we do in the book is through the different quarters that we talk about what's going on in the game, I have a meanwhile back in Atlanta, because to build up the drama, I want the reader to know, okay, what's going on in Atlanta, because if you ever watch the original ABC broadcast of it, they're going back and forth all the time, and Al Michaels, who does the Sunday night NFL games, was actually the play-by-play guy that evening, or that afternoon. Another thing we do with the play to kind of go deeper is we've got a diagram of the play. Everybody says that the cornerback fell down for Florida, but it actually wasn't a cornerback. It was the outside linebacker, Val Brown, who had dropped into coverage. And interesting story about this, there's 2 other books that have come out on Georgia's national championship season, but come to find out from Jeff Harper that the diagrams were wrong. And Jeff was the left tackle for Georgia at the time. And those diagrams made it look like that Jeff had missed his block. And 30 years later, Jeff was not happy about that. So when I interviewed Jeff, he said, let's get this right. And I said, that's the whole point of the book. So I watched the play 20 times in slow motion, I guess, diagrammed it out, sent it to Coach Whittemore, who was a wide receivers coach at Georgia in 1980, and I asked him, I said, we got to get this correct. And so then I sent it to Jeff. I said, is this right? He said, yes. And Jeff's still much bigger than me, so I want to make sure I got it right. And so that's another, I feel like, kind of really going deeper and getting down into the, to telling some different stuff about the play. Okay, let me read you Miss Dooley's excerpt and one more, and then we'll be done, because they're about to yank me off the stage here. Barbara Dooley, when Munson says Lindsey Scott, Lindsey Scott, Lindsey Scott, this is her memory. 4 weeks before that game, we had been in a terrible car accident. I had broken 11 ribs, had to have my ruptured spleen removed. In rehabbing, my goal was to get to the Florida game. I still wasn't well enough, but I was determined to go. I'd try and get up and walk a little bit every day to get my strength back. Looking back, I never should have done that, but I did. So Vincent had gotten the Jacksonville Bulldog Club to put a trailer in the parking lot just in case I couldn't make the whole game, and I couldn't. So I went to the trailer and watched the game in the bed. When we scored, I was out of my mind. I looked out the trailer window, and see, she was jumping up and down on the bed at that moment. If you know Miss Dooley, you could probably understand that. So she was out of her mind. She said, I looked out the trailer window and saw a Florida fan take his radio, and she said it was a little transistor radio, and throw it across the parking lot. It was like he was thinking he had won it, and it didn't happen. She said that thing busted into a million pieces, and she said she jumped even more. So, so that was kind of an interesting take on it. But as far as the legacy goes, a lot of people really tie that game into spending time with their parents. A couple of people were in the hospital. Talked to a lady, the cornbread story, I'll tell it quickly. She was baking cornbread at the time of the game, and she thought Georgia had lost, so she goes into the kitchen to check the cornbread. She flips the cornbread out on the table, and she starts screaming to her husband. She said, this was Southern Living looking cornbread. She said, you could have taken a picture of it and put it on the front of that magazine. It looked so good. She said, at the same time, my husband was screaming and yelling because Lindsey Scott was running down the sideline, scoring the winning touchdown. So she said, every year since then, they have had cornbread for the Georgia-Florida game. But the thing I asked her is, I said, have you changed the recipe 18 out of the last 21 years? I said, because we haven't won those. So you need to check your recipe before you make some this year. Finally, from a legacy standpoint, Doc Lucky, who was a Florida defensive tackle. He was about 6'2", 290. The guy was just huge at that time. You didn't see people his size. This is how he looks back 30 years. And Doc told me, he says, you're the first person I've talked to in 30 years about this game. He said, it hurt me so much. He said, we're 63 seconds away from our first ever SEC title, and y'all took it from us again. So this is what he told me. He said, I learned a lot from that game for life. No matter where I go, I really focus on the task and never let my guard down till it's over. Before I go to sleep, I leave one eye open before I close the other because I want to make sure everything is all right. Lindsey Scott, he instilled a lot of stuff inside of me. One of these days I would like to meet him, shake his hand and congratulate him personally, and let him know what he did that day has enabled me to teach my son and a lot of other athletes to don't quit until it's over. hopefully they will catch it and run for victory. That's what Lindsey Scott did. Thank you for your time.
That's terrific. I remember about a year ago, I was cleaning out the attic with my wife, and she said, "What are all these newspapers from?" I said, "Don't touch those. Those are George's year." I got every newspaper clip from that year. It says, I know, it's worth a lot of money now, I'm sure. Here's a little briefcase from Rotary to you, and I appreciate your time. And I think Dave Smith's in the back. He's going to buy about 10 of these books, you know, to remember that year. Thanks, that was terrific.